Hello, everyone. Good evening from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. This is Nawal Hamwi. Firstly, I want to thank our sponsors, StreamYard, for sponsoring our event. We couldn't have done it without their help, so thank you, StreamYard, once again for helping the community. I really hope you enjoyed these streaming sessions with the Flutter Under teams, and hopefully you're enjoying the Flutter Hackathon too. We're so happy to be holding this session with Tomek Polanski. Tomek has been working as a mobile developer for the last 13 years. He started with the Symbian and currently doing Flutter. Currently, he's a mobile tech lead at Groupon, developing Flutter application for the last 2.5 years. So the stage is all yours, Tomek.
Thank you, Nawal. Okay, can you I think everybody can hear me. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Tomek, and today I would like to talk about my experience when creating, in my opinion, large Flutter applications. So about the Flutter done really well, but there are not so many big applications, and because of that, people sometimes are questioning if they really should try to create bigger applications with Flutter, and is it feasible? So during this presentation, I would like to say something about how we kept our application scalable, what approaches did we do. I will say something about what went well, and also I will say about nitty-gritty stuff like what didn't go well and might happen to you. Okay, so the main question I would like to talk about is, can you make large Flutter applications? So let me try to answer this thing. But before that, you need to have some point of reference. So I need to talk a bit about my application. And like most of the data is already publicly available. So my application, like this is Groupon Merchant, and I will be talking for now only for Android. There is like 500,000 plus users who downloaded the application in the Google Play Store. We have around 90 pages in the application. We have about 4,800 unit tests and widget tests. And we have also around 260 Flutter driver tests, which are the UI tests. So for some of you, you can say like, okay, this is not a big application. So like depends like on what kind of application you have worked with, but also it's definitely not a small application. Okay, so this is my experience while creating this application. But before we go to like large scale application, let's go from the other side. What are the smallest applications you can have? So the smallest applications that we can have are usually prototypes. And prototypes are nice to write because you put a little amount of work and you have tangible effects. The thing about prototyping is really fast. And the best platforms for prototyping is usually web because JavaScript is dynamic language, and the web has also hot restart and hot reload. The problem with prototyping is that you gain the speed, but you lose the quality. And you cannot have a long-lasting prototype application because it's really hard to maintain and scale. Okay, so web is good for prototyping. But here we are usually mobile developers. So what about Android and iOS? Would you pick those platforms to create your prototypes? And I'm talking prototypes, not like minimum viable product. So usually no, because iOS and Android are pretty slow to create prototypes. So probably people would fall back to other approaches. But what about Flutter? So is Flutter good for prototyping? Actually, yes, because Dart can be dynamic language, and Flutter has hot restart and hot reload. And even more, a good example that you can create prototypes with Flutter is this presentation. So it's written actually in Flutter. Like, don't worry about the first animation because I think all over the stream the animation was pretty slow, but this is because the streaming. You can always download this application and see that it's really smooth. So yes, Flutter is really good for prototypes. But is it actually also good for creating applications? And the most important thing to create a big application is to make it scalable. So what are the most important things about like to make your application scalable? In my experience, I would say three things. First, good architecture. Second, maintainable code. And third, like tests. Okay, let's start from with the architecture. So first, let me see if there are people. Okay, there are some people in the chat. So like, if you can say like who is like Android and who is iOS on, or who is somebody else, it would be really nice to know, because it will help me with the presentation. But while we are doing it, let's think about Android. If you think about Android architecture, what do you think about? Do you think about Dagger? Do you think about, okay, HTTP, maybe Room, or Jetpack? So like think about, is this part of your architecture? Actually, not really. Those are just tools. And architecture is a bit different. Like with those tools, you can delay them, you can defer them. So for example, you don't need to instantly know if you will be using Room or SQLite when you're starting to develop your application, because those are only details. By architecture, I mean something like UI architecture, at least for Android. And we have like things like model view controller, model view presenter, model view view model, model view intent, model view whatever, block, and Redux. So those are more like architectures. So which one would you pick? It depends. So for Android, in Android, it's not so trivial to introduce new architecture. It's sometimes even hard. And this is causes people to be more opinionated about architecture. With Flutter, it's different. With Flutter, it's easy to pick and choose architecture. So which one should you pick? It really doesn't matter. You need to pick something that your team is comfortable with and that you have tried. Try not to introduce brand new architecture that you want to try out in your main project. Play around with some side project and maybe then introduce it. For example, I've used in my application that we've been developing for 2.5 years, Redux, and we're pretty happy with it. But it doesn't mean that I would say no if I start a new application. So important thing is when you pick architecture, stick to it. One thing that some people might have seen, like in my previous slide, I didn't say anything about provider. And this is because provider is really not an architecture. It's a tool. It's basically inherited widget on steroids. You can create architectures with it, but by itself, it's not really an architecture. Okay, this was about architecture. Now, second part would be maintainable code. How you can make like code maintainable, because if you don't have it, the application probably won't be scalable. There is a saying, a function should do one thing, it should do it well, and it should do it only. So it's really nice saying because it says that everything like should have one purpose. And this works pretty well in imperative way of working. But Flutter, like of course, has its functions. Also, like they should follow this rule. But Flutter, because it's declarative, we declare how UI looks using widgets. So I would like a bit modify this saying. A widget should do one thing, it should do it well, and it should do it only. And there is really good reason why you should have small widgets, because like then they can be reused. And another important thing in Flutter, everything's a widget. So almost everything, like render objects and elements are not widgets, but we not always work with them. Most of the time we are working with normal widgets. And the power of widgets comes when we are creating UI, because if everything's a widget, we can put everything everywhere. So for example, here we have like a page with a title, with a list. On Android, like list would be recycler view. Here the title we would set as a string, and yeah, something like this. But on Flutter, here everything's a widget. So instead of title, we can have a list. So like this really uh, tells us that really plenty of widgets can be reused. All like plenty of functionality can be reused. But to be reused, first of all, like it needs to be a widget, and second of all, it's to need to be as small as possible. On Android, if we have recycler view and a scroll bar, like we can see here, scroll bar is a property of recycler view. But in Flutter, list view doesn't know anything about list view. So list view doesn't know anything about scroll bar. Scroll bar is completely different widget. So you basically wrap your list view with the scroll bar. You compose. So the composition is really important in Flutter. So if you have really small, reusable, single-purpose widgets, you can reuse them even more. So that's really important to have. So how big should be a widget or a function? For a function, there is a suggestion that you need to cut it until you cannot cut it anymore. You will end up probably with like 2 lines or 3 lines of functions that for some might be like scary or like way too big overkill. But this is an approach to teach you how to create single purpose functions. Same for widgets. Like you should also approach widgets as single purpose like elements and try to refactor them until you cannot do it anymore. I'm not saying you should do it always, but with this approach, you will learn how to do it properly. And if you have those kind of small widgets, you are not coding anymore. Of course, okay, you are coding, but it's more like putting Legos together, building your application for small blocks. Yes, you will need to write code, but this is more like playing with building blocks. And another thing, like last thing that I think is really important for maintainability of the code is pride. You need to be a bit proud of your code. So there's this saying, when someone first looks at our code, we want them to be impressed by the attention to details, struck by how ordered it is, convinced that professionals were at work. So yes, too much pride in your work might not be good, but at least if your code is good quality, you will be happy to show it to other people and proud. You will be proud what you have done. So also, this is pretty important to be proud of it. Okay, and last about testing. Let me have a sec. So testing also helps us with the scalability of our application. So let me ask you a question. If you would join a brand new project, a brand new team, and you would need to pick one of two. Either you would have joined like an app that has really good code, like everything there is working nicely, but it has zero tests, or would you prefer to join a team that doesn't have such a good code, but have really good tests? So think about which one would you prefer to join, which team would you prefer to join? For me, I would prefer to join the second project, the one with not so good code, but really good tests. Because that code can be always, can always be refactored if you have proper tests. If you do something wrong, the test will warn you that, okay, no, you cannot do it, you're breaking the existing functionality. So over time, the application would improve in quality. Also, you will be able to add new features, test them as well. So in the beginning, it might be a bit hard, but like the application is on a good path. On the other hand, if you join this perfect application and you were to change something, you will be always in fear that you will break something. So, like if you don't write any more tests, any new tests, the quality of the application might deteriorate. Yes, you could start writing the test for the existing code, but again, you are not sure if you test everything exactly how it should be. So, therefore, I would prefer the second project. Another thing about testing in Flutter. So there are like those three types of tests. Unit tests, which are like the usual, where we have like low confidence if it's testing if the application works properly, because unit tests test really small amount of code. But because testing for really small amount of code, they are really maintainable, because if they fail, you don't need to look far to see what's failing. And they're also pretty fast. The next one are widget tests, which are one of my favorites, because you have bigger confidence because you can test bigger amount of code, but also maintenance is more annoying because you need to look through more code, and they are around 10 times slower than unit tests. So unit tests might take up to 10 seconds. Those can take like 100 seconds, 200 seconds, hopefully. They shouldn't take more. And last are the Flutter driver tests, which are the integration tests that you can run on a device. So they were the least favorite of the bunch for me, because Flutter driver isn't by default amazing to use. You would need to put most of the tests in one file. When you run one test, the another test will depend on the state where the application finished with the previous state. So you need to test everything at once. Like the separation of tests in a file are not so nice, and you cannot like restart the test easily. So those are pretty annoying. It would be great if one would be able to run every like those integration tests better. So, but if there was a way to make them faster, they would be pretty nice. So those tests can be really beneficial. So in our application, as mentioned before, we have around 250 Flutter driver tests, and they are really nicely working. After, like, in some time, I will be demoing those, so to show how nice they are, but this comes in a second. Okay, but now there's a big elephant in the room. Nobody will create a large Flutter application unless like we won't be let like to by our managers. So first we need to have like approval, and there is issue with that. Either you are somebody that creates a brand new application, greenfield application. In that case, you're pretty lucky, because then if managers approve, you're like you're ready to start doing it from scratch, and then it's pretty easy. But most of us developers, we are already working in projects that have already a code base. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's not so nice, but if we want to change it to Flutter, yes, then we have some issues. But there are two approaches to this problem. First, the simpler solution is to migrate everything at once. So if you have your legacy application, you can either stop developing for it, say, tell to the managers that, okay, we will need to switch to Flutter application for a couple of months, and then we can release it. Or you can have like two teams, one still working on the native application, while you are migrating the other, like migrating and writing Flutter application. And I said this is a simpler solution, but it's really hard because people don't like to not being delivered new features. Also users, they want your application to be improving. But if you are switched to like implement the Flutter application, there won't be any new features coming. Another problem is that you will be pressed by the managers to finish your work. They will be constantly asking you when it will be ready, when it will be ready. So even though you wanted to spend more time to make your application as good as possible, there will be this pressure to release as fast as possible. Oh, oh, okay. Mm, okay. Mm, mm. Okay, sorry guys, I had to change my headphones. Can anybody hear me? Uh, okay, whew, okay. Sorry, my battery is finished. Okay, let's go. Let me continue. Okay, where? Oh, okay, and the worst thing that can happen if you're migrating everything at once is the release will be really scary. If you're a startup that creates brand new application, on your first release you have like tens of users. If your application crashes, it only crashes for like those 10 users. But if you are already an established application, you have like tens of thousands users, you would be terrified, and rightfully so, to release a brand new application which is not anymore like native, but it's like Flutter, which is compiled to machine code. And this thing is really scary. So even though this is a simpler approach, it's not advisable. There's another approach, piece by piece, activity by activity, view controller by view controller. So if your managers allow you to create your first feature in Flutter, you can create like one single, in this case on Android, activity, and implement this feature as a Flutter feature there. That should be relatively safe because you don't change the rest of the application. And if in the worst case scenario, if the feature like starts crashing, yeah, you can revert it. There is not so much time wasted on that. So it looks much more promising. But the problem is you need to wrap your head around how to do it. Thankfully, since around 1 year ago, there's this app-to-app approach that Flutter team delivered that you can embed Flutter into your application. So it's a bit of work, but it works nicely. So the approach for that is first try creating new features in your application. If everything goes well and you see like improvement in your productivity, then you can even think about migrating older code, like the other code, to Flutter, piece by piece. Okay, so why am I saying about this? So have I ever used app-to-app in application? Actually, no. So when we started to like wanted to include Flutter in our application, it was like 2.5 years ago, and there was nothing such a like app-to-app. So we had to implement it ourselves. It was a bit painful. I wouldn't recommend other people to do it unless they really want to. For Android, it took us around 1 week to see the first Hello World page in Flutter in our application. for iOS, it took us a bit longer. And after that, like there was problem because nobody else was doing it. We need to play with our grader. So there were issues with that. But even with those issues, we've delivered our first feature, like one person within 3 weeks, and for both platforms. And the release went pretty well. And since then, we decided, okay, let's continue doing that. The interesting thing is that when I was developing that feature, uh, it took me less time to develop this feature in Flutter versus delivering it in Android, native Android. And Flutter, at that point, I've been using only for around 3 months, whereas I've been 4 years Android developer. So like it really, we really saw the speed how we can develop new features. So since then, we started piece by piece uh, implementing new features, and the time that we saved on implementing new features, we used to refactor and move the old features to Flutter. In the beginning, we were around the same speed as we would be in native, which was like quite surprising. But after a couple of months, we got even faster. So we actually saved time when doing this approach. So like we were pretty happy about that. Okay, so this is about those approaches. Now, like interesting things. What issues we have faced during the development? Okay, so here is one issue, some Dart code. Let me make it darker, it should be better. So here are our helper functions for descending sorting. We have similar for ascending, but here the first one was the version 1 and the second was version 2. Both work the same in unit tests. Both work the same when running on desktop. Unfortunately, the first one was crashing on Android. So it was pretty surprising to us because like the compiler didn't say anything that the first is invalid, no linting issues, tests were running properly, and again, on desktop it was working properly. So it was because of the generics. Generics like are not perfect in my opinion in Dart, so we have to have some tests on devices so we can pick up again those issues. Thankfully, this was easy thing to spot because it was 100% reproducible, and we really quickly fixed it by using the second version of this method. Okay, that's one. Another thing was when we were releasing for the first time for iOS. As I said, like it was a pretty smooth launch, unfortunately with some issues. We had some native crash on iOS. Thankfully, the team was iOS team was really able to quickly fix it, and since then it went okay. But still, for example, now we have one crash on one specific device that the poor user cannot use our application. And this is happening somewhere in the Flutter engine. Unfortunately, we don't have access to that one specific device. So it's pretty, we are not happy with that. But again, this is one user, like there are hundreds of thousands others that use our application without the issue. In the past, we've like in other projects, I've been removing some Android devices from support because of the some strange behavior, crashes, and so on. So having one person that cannot use our application is not so great, but like the other people have a benefit of Flutter because of that. Next one. And this one is a bit strange. So recently, like in our application, we had like exactly 98 images. And I was adding yet another image. So we had 90 images. But when I added this 90th image, like on my Windows machine, some tests started to fail, and I had no idea what's happening. Those tests had nothing to do with the code that I changed. And it ended up like I saw that whenever adding like 90th image during widget tests, one image that when we run widget tests, they have some size and we are tapping it. So like if the image has like 20 by 20 pixels, we can tap it. After adding the 90th image, like, it was not tappable anymore. So and because it has size 0, 0. So it's not in the production, it's not a production issue, but pretty annoying. Still, I need to verify what's happened because I noticed it during the creation of this presentation. Still, there are some little things that are annoying. And another thing is about managers. So managers need to be convinced to try Flutter. So at some point, it took me 3 months to convince my first manager to try out Flutter. And this was the first feature. So it went really well. And at some point, a new manager came in. So I had to spend another more time to convince that manager that Flutter is a good solution for us. Thankfully, after a couple of months, like the manager saw that everything goes okay. So yeah, we were good. But also recently, I had to do it another time to convince, like, yes, Flutter works. We have working thing in production, and everything looks smooth. So yes, like talking to managers is a skill when you want to use Flutter, because again, you need to convince. Okay, so was it worth it? Let me stop sharing this thing, and let me share my entire screen. So something that I will show now, I will show a demo of our application. So all the data that is there is mocked. So there's no customer data, first of all, and there are no features that we haven't released. I've removed those. So let me go here, start. And this is something that I said about Flutter Flutter driver. And Flutter driver runs on normal devices. At some point, we noticed that okay, like we can improve it, but why not? Why should we run it on normal devices? Why cannot we run it as a desktop application? Actually, we can. The benefit of this is that we don't need. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I need to change. Yes, probably now it will look better. The benefit of having it as a desktop application, we don't need to use emulators all the time, and emulators are the issues for the test being not so stable. Also, on our CI, we don't need to connect to devices or emulators. We can just run this application as a Linux application and run it against Docker, which is much faster than normal emulators and simulators. Of course, this doesn't solve everything. We are running those also on normal devices because, as I said before, that we had this issue with Dart and generics. But now, instead of having like nightly compilation, like nightly runs with Appium of our application, on every commit, we are doing those tests. And furthermore, like we are on every master build, when we merge something, we are doing screenshots for all those screens. So if I'm worried that I'm doing a big refactor of UI, recently we did some refactoring of changing how the dialogues look like. Like we had to change like tens of dialogues, and we were like, I would have been afraid that I break some dialogue, but that wasn't the case. I ran the all these screenshots, and all of our screens have screenshots, and I checked if I broke something or not. Well, of course, I broke some screen, but thankfully I fixed them, and because of our like extensive testing and this improved version of Flutter driver, like we are not afraid to change how the application look like. Okay, let me maybe that's enough. Like, still, oh, okay, exactly. So I had to remove a bit of text. Okay, I need to stop sharing, and I need to share again. Okay, so was it worth it? Yeah, in case of refactoring, yes, we can change the entire application without fear. For normal application, of course, Android, if you have a good suite of tests, uh, also you won't be worried about refactoring. Next thing is desktop. So desktop started to be just for fun that we developed it. Like I did it on my free time to like do presentation and so on. And then we found a really good use for it. But even now, some of our designers not necessarily have all the devices like tablets or iPads. So we started to just build them our version of Mac application and send them around. And now they can like check all the designs like according to tablet design, where they will just extend, make the application bigger. So even though we are not releasing this application as a desktop, it works pretty nice, and the designers were really impressed by that. So basically, like desktop is fun, and it makes the entire experience of Flutter also something fun to do. So everybody really likes developing Flutter application, our Flutter application, even though it really grew since we started it. So my question was, can we make large Flutter application? So yes, yes we can. And for us, if you stick to the best practices of normal development, because again, this is normal software development, then you are able to make your application scalable as well. Okay, that's all that I wanted to say. So I would be interested if anybody has any questions, or did you even hear me most of the time? Uh,
Super interesting, Tomek. I really love this session. Yes, we've got some cool questions. So the first question, okay, so we have a question from Carlo. He's saying, how would you delegate responsibilities among developers in a Flutter project?
Uh, so like depends that depends on the scale of your project. So like first let's go on the really big scale. So at some point we want to completely move our dependencies to use as this Flutter packages. So everybody is responsible for their own entire pub dev package. And because Flutter gives us a really nice way to do it, every team can be responsible for only one big feature. And there's this core model that, like the normal Flutter application, that in PubSpec gathers all those dependencies. When there's something, okay, we are ready for release, they just increase the version of the package that that team is responsible for, and that's all. So every team would have different GitHub repositories. But that said, it's for like big projects. But if you are interested in small projects, still, I'm really big fan of developing per feature versus developing per like component. So like I don't know if you're Carlo, was it? If you are iOS or Android developer, in the past, like people kept like all the activities in one folder called activity, or like view models in a thing called view models. It was horrible idea. So currently in our project we have like a folder called features, and there we have like deals or customer feedback or inbox, and these folders are one specific feature. And I would like all the developers to know how the entire flow works. So how to like write UI, how to write HTTP client code, and how to you do like this interactor view model part. So I don't know if it helped you, but I would split by features, and this doesn't differ so much versus normal Android or iOS development. I hope it helped.
Thank you. Yes, I hope it helped, Carlo. Another question from Abud. He's saying, what's the best state management library in your opinion?
Again, it doesn't really matter. So I did at some point React.js, and at that point we did Redux in web, and then it was really nice because Redux is something really similar to model view intent. Like model view intent came from Redux, and like I was knowledgeable enough about this to like integrate it in the application and teach the other team, and it works very well for us. You can so much shoot yourself with Redux. If you are messy, it can be horrible. So as long as we are keeping the good quality, there is boilerplate, yes, like there is people saying there is boilerplate, but the good thing about Redux is when we implement stories, we don't need to think how to implement it. Like the Redux enforces to do exactly the things what we have to do, that we don't even need to think about it. It's like a doctor doing CPR. Doctors don't think about how to do CPR because this is something built into them. So, but again, we like Redux, but also like any other architecture that you are comfortable with will work, but you need to focus on like keeping the quality of that code. So like doing providers, and then from providers you can do something like MVVM or like blog or something like this will work.
Cool.
Hopefully that answers.
Awesome. Another question from Mathieu. I hope that I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's saying, do you use mocked responses on network layer or only mock and tests the UI, testing the UI?
Oh, so can I let me, am I sharing?
Yep.
So, am I sharing which just with window? Okay, let me. I will show some. So in our, I'm not sharing it. Like it's pronounced Mateusz. Like hey Mateusz. Uh, Stop. And I'll start. And I need to have the entire screen. So we have our own mocking files. So for example, I have like dependence, no, not this dependencies. Oh, sorry, wrong project. Let's see if it loads. Yes. So we have some dependencies. We have some package. Like let me close everything. And we go to test utils. We have test resources, our responses, and here we have like plenty of our JSON files structured the same way as our HTTP endpoints are structured. And here we have all our like data. And this data, when we start our test, we say like, okay, read this file to set up this test. So we are mocking this only on during our tests. So did it answer your question? Let me stop. Sure.
Okay. So another question from Carlo again. Do you use any tool to normalize the coding practices in big projects? Something like Pedantic or even project-wide snippets or linting?
Okay, so like pedantic is like easy level. So I have my own. We have our own set of lint rules, and I have shown somebody like one of my other Flutter colleagues, no, no, not colleagues, like friends that do Flutter, and they asked me, do I hate my life? So we have such a strict set of linting rules. I have even it somewhere in the gist, and usually, like pretty often, we update it. So yes, we are really focusing on linting. One thing, why? So no, like about snippets. No, we don't use snippets because the code should be one big snippet. So like we can like we are really strict about our PRs. Sometimes maybe too much. For example, in my previous project, we were rejecting PRs if they didn't have dot at the end of Java dot. But again, that was maybe exaggeration. But we are pretty strict with the quality of our code and also tests. Like I do, for example, PDD. I don't enforce it for on others, but if something is not tested, they get instant rejection in PR.
Cool. So we don't have any more questions. I think,
So,
yep, that's a wrap up for today. Uh,
so like maybe one thing, like if anybody has any more questions, you can reach me uh, at Twitter, like T Polanski. I'm always happy to answer any questions. If somebody wants to have this Flutter driver, because we published a package that like really improves how you can do Flutter driver test and makes it easy to run on different devices like desktop, mobiles, not yet web, like different translations. So if anybody is interested in it, like just ping me on Twitter.
awesome. So yeah, you can find Tomek's handle, Twitter handle in the ticker down, and you can find the Flutter community as well account and our account, GDG Jeddah Flutter community, Tomek, Polanski, and Nawal Al Hawi. Thank you so much everyone for watching. Thank you so much, Tomek, for your time and for the invaluable information. And stay tuned for more awesome events. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.